my name is LoG, and welcome to another edition of LoG Power-Ups. Today's power-up, we will be going over small arpeggio shapes, which in my opinion are a little bit more valuable than the big multiple octave arpeggio shapes that most people tend to think of when they think of arpeggios. These smaller shapes are a little bit more modifiable, and they're easier to get in and out of or to connect to other small arpeggio shapes like little puzzle pieces. This power-up will be split into parts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a final part with each video ending with a backing track that gradually increases tempo for you and I to play over. If you enjoy this type of instruction material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below. And now let's get on to part 1. So before we begin, I want to go over what I mean when I say small arpeggio shapes. So for example, if I play this one shape that most people know or learn in the early stages of practicing arpeggios, it looks something like this. That's just a standard major arpeggio starting on the A string. I started on F. That doesn't really matter, but that is the shape that most people will know. They like to practice the shape because it's physically easy to play for the left hand, flows pretty well, it's not super stretchy or anything, and it also goes hand in hand with certain techniques like sweep picking, which is what people usually use to play this sort of figure, just because it's physically easier than alternate picking everything. So nothing wrong with that, of course. It's good to know that this shape exists, but the problem is looking at it as simply an arpeggio shape, meaning one shape, is not really accurate, because what is an arpeggio? An arpeggio is a chord. You're just playing the notes of the chord individually. Well, if I'm playing a major chord, how many notes are in a major chord? 3, the 1, 3, and 5, 1, 3, and 5 of the corresponding scale. So if I run this arpeggio and look at the notes, notice what happens. From the beginning, it's 1, 3, 5, and then another 1, 3, and 5. So the reality is this shape is really 2 smaller arpeggios sandwiched together, played back to back in different octaves. This is the 1, 3, 5 in the lower octave. This is the 1, 3, 5 in the higher octave. So if I only practice this shape as one large shape, that's probably how I'm going to play it, because generally the way we play is heavily determined by what we practice. And if I'm only looking at this as one shape, I'll probably start the shape and always feel kind of obligated to run the entire thing because I'm only looking at it as one entity. But it really isn't. It's 2 entities, right? 1, 3, 5, and then another 1, 3, 5 on top. So if you break it apart into these smaller shapes, you'll discover smaller, maybe more easily used shapes that you can kind of fit into your normal playing in a less kind of obvious or blatant way, right? If you're only playing these large shapes, when you fit them in, they're just super obvious because you're just hammering in these notes over and over again because you feel like you're forced to play the entire thing. But the smaller shapes can slide into your playing in a more subtle way that can be very useful. And then we can break it down even further if we want, because if you think about it, nothing is telling us that we have to play the shape, the chord, or the arpeggio in 1, 3, 5 order, right? We can play 3, 5, 1, and that's still a chord. We can play 5, 1, 3, that's still a chord. We can play 1, 5, 3. We can play 3, 1, 5. Any of those orders, of course, they're all different and they will sound different and feel different, but they're all the same chord. They're the same thing, so they're all going to be valuable in their own right. So the easiest way to come up with these is by take that same exact shape, but play each kind of 3-note group and practice that as an isolated shape. So of course we have 1, 3, 5 right here, but then if I play the next shape right here, this is 3, 5, 1. That's not, of course, in order, 1, 3, 5 order, but that's still a perfectly fine small little arpeggio shape to memorize, not to mention one of the most common chords on guitar. If you ever played like Crazy Train by Ozzy Osbourne, that's in the verse. Right, what's this chord? See that shape? That's literally what I just played. That's 3, 5, 1 of the implied chord that's happening at that moment. Or if you've ever played Black or White by Michael Jackson, what's this chord right here? That's the same shape as Ozzy Osbourne, right? It's that 3, 5, 1 shape that again implies an A major arpeggio because it comes from this larger shape if you want to look at it like that. So nice. So I've got a 1-3-5 shape. I'll go back to my original spot. 1-3-5. Then I've got a 3-5-1 that I'll practice individually. And then what's the next group of 3? 5-1-3, right? Well, that should be very obvious to most people. That's just a D chord shape, right? When you play a D chord down here, the notes you're actually playing right here are A, D, F sharp, or D's 5-1-3. In fact, wherever you move this chord, if you're implying a normal major chord, this will always be 5, 1, and 3. If you're looking at that ring finger as the root, it's always going to be that, right? And then, of course, the last little bit, the 1-3-5. So if we break this apart, we can actually get 4 very useful small chord or arpeggio shapes. We have a 1-3-5, a 3-5-1, a 5-1-3, and then another 1-3-5. And of course, that's just one of these larger shapes that I'm breaking apart, that you could do this with any of the other ones. But then you can get even more experimental. I don't really do this too much in this power up, but just something to think about. How about if I play 1, 5, and then 3? What would that look like? 1, skip this 3, go to this 5, skip this 1, go to this 3. So now I have a shape like this, right? Or how about 3-1-5? I'll play this 3, skip this 5, play this 1, skip that 3, play this 5, and I have this, right? Which are also really cool. A lot of players will experiment with that stuff because it has a more open sound because you're kind of jumping octaves. So that's really what I mean when I say these small arpeggio shapes. It's really focusing on just the core notes that you need, and you're not doing too much doubling. Because when you do that, you'll get a small little piece of one of the larger arpeggio shapes that you're probably more used to, and these small shapes are way easier to more subtly fit into your lead and chord playing. So with all that stuff in mind, let's now move on to part 1. So the first section is really going to be 2 chords played back and forth, and those chords are B flat major and C minor. And you'll notice as we run through them, we're also going to be using the same shapes for both chords, except one, of course, is going to be major and the other is going to be minor. So let's go over what those shapes will look like. The first one is going to be built off of this standard B flat major chord that we all know and play. And it's also really important to know the numbers of the notes in this chord. So from thick string to thin string, this chord is always 1, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1. Always important to know. And the shape that we're going to be playing for this first part is going to be the ring, pinky, and middle finger section of this chord. So that is just 5, 1, and 3. Kind of looks like an E chord if you play it, right? If you play just a normal E chord, that's what this is. By the way, if you ever play an E chord, the fretted notes of a plain E chord are always 5, 1, and 3, right? So keep that in mind. That's what we're doing right here. Now, the difference is we're starting on the top, we're starting on the third and coming down. So 3, 1, and 5. But we are also adding 1 extra note to the mix, and that is going to be the 2. So where is 2 in relation to the 3? It's just back a whole step as it always is. If this is 3, 2, and then 1 and 5. I'm just popping that note in there just because it sounds cool. I just felt like doing it. So then brings another topic, which I'm not going to get too deep into the series, and that is fingering. Whenever you're dealing with something very simple like this, like an arpeggio or a simple scale or something like that, there are so many ways to do it on the guitar, and if I went through all of those ways, these videos would be like twice as long. So I'm not going to do that. I'll leave that up to you to experiment with the fingering, but just to give you an idea of what you could experiment with. For example, the way I'm playing this is 3, 2, 1, 5. Middle on the 3, pointer on the 2, pinky on the 1, ring on the 5, just like that. But you could, instead of playing 3 and 2 on the same string, you could play 1 and 2 on the same string, because 2 is back a whole step from 3, but it's also up a whole step from 1, right? If this is 3, that's 2. If this is 1, that's 2. Guess what? Same note. Right as I play them. So you could play the 2 located there instead. That would look like this. Instead of this, 3, 2, 1, 5, you could play 3, 2, 1, 5, right? So the first one had 3, 2 on the same string. The other one had 1 and 2 on the same string. Again, that puts your hand in a different position. It's going to feel different to pick. It's going to feel different for your left hand technique. All of those things will change just by moving that one single note. I'll leave that up to you to figure out which fingering you prefer for all of these shapes. Some of these shapes, the finger is going to be pretty obvious. Like the way I'm doing it is probably going to be the best fingering. But to be honest, I'm doing it like this for the entire run of this. But if I were to practice this one, I would probably say that that's the better fingering because it kind of sets you up for the next part. But again, completely up to you. So that's the shape. We're doing 3, 2, 1, 5, back up, 1, 2, 3. And then we're adding in 1 extra little 5 right here. So that's the whole phrase. I'll play it a couple times. time. And that's just 3, 2, 1, 5, 1, 2, 3, 5. Now you'll notice you can think, oh, I'm playing like a larger shape right there. That's a 5, 1, 3, 5 shape, like the middle 4 strings of this larger bar chord. That's correct, but again, I think it's very valuable to look at this as not as one shape, but 2 smaller shapes. We have this one, our little E chord shape, 5, 1, 3, but then we also have this new 5 up top giving us this. This is a 1, 3, 5, little staircase shape that a lot of people use for like an F chord or something like that. That's how they usually learn it. So again, 2 smaller shapes, 5, 1, 3, 1, 3, 5, both valuable in their own right, both important to look at them as their own thing, their own entity, not just as a one larger shape that happens to contain everything, right? Really important. After that, we simply take everything that we just did, move it up 2 frets, right? So what does that look like? Exactly same thing, but we take the third of this sound, or the third of this figure, of which there's only one, it's always that middle finger, and we pull it back a fret. Right? Making it minor. So that shape sounds like this. So even though it's going to feel different for your left hand, you need to be aware that all of the notes, except for the flat 3, they're all in the same relative location that they were in, right? Earlier in the other chord. So for example, take a look when I play 2, 1, 5. So 3, 2, 1, 5. See the shape? It's like pointer, pinky, and then ring with this stretch between, like 2 frets in between them. Guess what? This shape is the same thing. See that? 2, 1, 5 of the C minor, exactly the same thing. Might not feel like that initially because the 3 is in a different location, and that might throw you. But keep in mind, the only note that is in a different location in this entire thing is the third. Here it is for the major. Here it is for the minor. I'm starting right here. See that middle finger? Up 1 fret from where I started the first chord, down the shape. One more time. 3, flat 3 in this case, 2, 1, 5, 1, 2, 3, flat 3, and then 5. So what would the chord shapes look like right here, just to confirm, just to hammer these down? The major shape looks like our little E chord, 5, 1, 3, and then 1, 3, 5 is the other one. The minor shape, again, move up a whole step, but make it minor, so you take the third, flat it, and now it looks like this, 5, 1, flat 3. And then what's the smaller shape for this? Not this one. We take the third right there, pull it back a fret. I'm just borrowing to grab the flat 3 and the 5. 1, flat 3, 5. This feels like the middle 4 strings of the minor chord that goes right here, which obviously makes perfect sense. And this shape right here, if you pull it back to the open fret, kind of looks like an E minor, right? Because again, that's the shape that it's kind of based on. Again, this is 5, 1, flat 3. So back to back a couple times, sounds like this. And if you need to figure out kind of what fingering or the fingers you want to use, if you do want to modify the fingering, obviously do that. In regards to the right hand, I'm doing this a particular way. I'm going to talk about it at the end after we go through everything we're doing right now because, you know, again, it's kind of the same thing. You can do what I'm doing, but it's probably best for you to just do whatever you're comfortable with. But we'll get there as we continue. So one more time, the 2 shapes back to back, B flat major, C minor. Okay, so after that, we now begin another run of B flat major and C minor, but the shapes are now different. Instead of starting on the 3, I'm now going to start on the 5 of each shape. So coming from where I just left off, back a whole step, and now I'm on the 5 of B flat, and that begins the next shape. What shape do you think I'm going to come down? One of the smaller ones I just discovered, this one. The little staircase, 1, 3, 5, except I'm starting on top, 5, 3, 1. And I'm also adding 1 extra note, the 7. Where is 7? Always back 1 fret from the root. So that's how I'm adding it. 5, 3, 1, 7, back a fret, and then right back up. Okay, so 5, 3, 1, 7, right back up, 1, 3, 5, and then I'm also grabbing the 7 in the higher octave. How did I know that that was 7? Because if this is 5 right here, a major scale on 1 string, the easiest thing of all time, 5, 6, 7. You should know that if you're playing guitar. You absolutely need to know these distances horizontally between the notes. It will make you much better, trust me. Or you can look at this note as back 1 fret from the root, which is here, right? That's another B flat. And I can look at that B flat, go back a fret, and know that it's 7. Again. So I'll play the entire thing so far, these 3 shapes. There's on your end. Now, of course, we could change the fingering if you wanted to. So instead of playing the 7 right here, I could play the 7 right here, almost creating this little chord shape, 1, 3, 5, 7. Instead of 1, 3, 5, 7, that would look like this. again, this is up to you if you find that fingering to be easier as we're moving through. Personally, the way I'm doing it, it wasn't the choice, so I'm not doing it. I'm doing it like this. I'll leave that up to you though. After that, guess what we're gonna do? C minor, right? Up a whole step, exactly the same thing, but making those modifications to make it work in minor. Because we are now not only playing flat 3, we are also playing a 7, and the 7 will be flat as well, because when we're playing just straight up normal minor like we're doing right here, the 7 is also flat. So instead of this shape, watch this, 5, 3, 1, 7, 1, 3, 5, it becomes this, 5, not 3, but flat 3, so I'll roll my finger, 1 and not 7, even though that honestly would probably sound pretty cool, and not normal 7, flat 7 right there, so it sounds like this. Feels more kind of pentatonic when you do that. So the first one, major, a little slower. Next one, C minor, just moving up right here, starting on its 5, right? That's C, that's its 5. 5, flat 3, 1, flat 7, 1, flat 3. Now you might think I'm just gonna roll back up to 5 and then play the flat 7 up the octave. Not 100% doing that, I'm just kind of throwing in a different note for fun. So it looks like this. So that's me playing a 4 right here. So 5, flat 3, 1, flat 7, 1, flat 3, not 5, but 4, and then 1. I kind of like that because it kind of implies a B flat major, because the 4 and flat 7 of C minor is actually the 5 and 1 of B flat. Not that that's that important, but if you're curious, that's what it is. That's kind of what I'm thinking about. And I'm also ending on the pinky right here because that's going to be the finger to use for the next part. So I'll play those two one more time. C minor. Right? So that last little bit, 5, flat 3, 1, flat 7, 1, flat 3, 4, not 5, even though you might want to do the exact same thing that we did. Instead of the 5, it's the 4, just for fun. And then we double that pinky note. And that's the entire thing for the first part, right? A lot of these small little shapes. Let's just kind of recap all the small shapes that we got out of this. For the B flat major, we have this one. That's our 5, 1, 3. And then we also have 1, 3, 5. And then for the C minor, it's the same two shapes, right? 5, 1, 3. And then 1, 3, 5, of course, the 3 being flat because we're playing minor, right? We get these little mini shapes out of it. And then, of course, adding in some of those other notes like the 2, knowing that if you're playing this shape, the 2 is located right here. So if you want to do like a little chord lick out of it, that's possible because the 2 is always located right there if you're thinking about this small shape, right? Same thing with the minor one. If you're thinking about this small shape, 5, 1, 3, guess what? The 2 is right there, just like it was in the major. Do cool stuff like that, right? Knowing where these notes are located, always going to give you an advantage. So let me run this a couple times, nice and slow, from the beginning. Again, remember that last little modification? Flat 3, 4, and then 2 1s. One more time. And that's the figure. So real quick before we go on to the backing track, I wanted to talk a little bit about technique. Again, it's going to be completely up to you. If you're really good at alternate picking, just alternate pick this whole thing, call it a day. But if you want to experiment with some other things, I'll show you generally what I'm doing. I don't honestly know if I'm doing anything super consistent. I probably am, but I'm not honestly really sure. But what I'm doing is something along these lines. So any opportunity that I can do a pull-off or a hammer-on one string, I'm probably doing that. So the first 2, 3 to 2 right here, pulling off for sure. Then when I play the root and 5th, that's 1 pick stroke. So that's an upstroke following through, like a little mini sweep pick if you want to call it that. Notice, pick, pull off, 1 upstroke handling those 2 notes. And then on the way back, I think I'm doing, at the slow tempos, it doesn't really matter, but when I'm doing faster tempos, I think I do, after that upstroke on the A string, I'm doing middle finger to pick the D string, ring finger to pick the G string, then hammer on, and then I don't know. Oh, I just did something really different right there. Hold on. Okay, so I do the same thing, but that top note I'm actually grabbing with my middle finger. So let me recap all of that. Pick, pull off, upstroke, same upstroke, middle finger, ring finger, hammer on, middle finger. I think that's what I'm doing, which then allows me to set up the exact same right hand configuration with a nice downstroke on the next string. I think that is what I'm doing. again, it's completely up to you in regards to what you want to do. This is what's comfortable for me, so that's how I'm navigating it. But definitely looking at this as anytime you can do a hammer on or a pull off, I would probably do that. Lets your right hand kind of reset whatever it needs to do. If you are ascending this way and alternate picking is difficult, you can try to do a little bit of sweep picking, or you can do kind of what I'm doing using picking fingers, completely up to you. As we continue in the next section, that one's pretty straightforward. That's just downstroke, one upstroke playing these two, follow through like a little mini sweep. Picking that one right there. So down, one upstroke for both of these, downstroke, then hammer on. And then I'm actually doing my middle finger right there for whatever reason. Picking that, doing a hammer on, and I'm probably doing the same thing here. Pretty similar, yeah. So again, the technical side, I'll kind of leave that up to you. It's kind of doesn't make too much sense for me to tell you how to physically play this because everyone's got different technique. But that's how I'm doing it. Pretty much whenever I'm ascending this way, I will use picking fingers. Whenever I'm descending this way, I use a like upward sweep, if you want to call it that. And then most of the time, if I'm doing multiple notes on one string, I'm usually doing hammer-ons or pull-offs. Again, it'll change depending on what I feel like at the moment or what my hand just subconsciously does. So it's not super consistent. But again, figure out what you want to do with the stuff. So yeah, that should pretty much be it. Practice this stuff, get all these shapes down, think about the small shapes as you're going through it. Come back to this part of the video and we'll get on with this backing track. All right, that does it for part one of this small arpeggio power-up. As usual, if you enjoy this type of instruction and material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below, and I'll see you in part two.